van, and once by allowing he and his family to be poisoned to such an extent that he had the same cognitive impairment that we know lead poisoning causes. This isn't like rocket science, it's just some basic science. We know exactly what lead in the blood does both for cognitive impairment, academic achievement, the ability to hold a job and succeed in life in that regard, but also what it does to impulse control. Right? We know that lead has a direct effect on impulse control, which impulsivity has a direct connection to quote-unquote criminality. Most all the crimes that Freddie Gray ever did were crimes of impulsiveness. It wasn't some sociopathic, criminogenic individual. And people said, well, why did he run from the police? Well, that's a pretty logical impulse when you're black in Baltimore, to be honest. And the fact that a lot of white folks can't understand that suggests that we think that police in the hood are there for the same reason that they're there in our neighborhood, to get the cat out of the tree, but that ain't why they came, right? So running from a police officer might not make sense in Auburn Hills, it might not make sense in Grosse Pointe, it makes plenty of sense given the history in a place like Baltimore, but even if it's not the best move, if you have had your blood poisoned by lead for years, your brain is not functioning the way that it should be because of a system of oppression that exposed you to those things, right? Now, it wasn't just Freddie Gray. It wasn't just slumlords. Let's even get clear. It was the government. Here's how. In the 1990s, it was finally revealed that Johns Hopkins University, the Kennedy Krieger Institute in particular, right, had been engaged in a lead abatement study using federal dollars for the study, along with some private monies, but it was a federally funded effort. It means taxpayer-funded effort. And what they were doing was they were recruiting poor, almost exclusively black families in Baltimore, and encouraging, one might say enticing, one might even say bribing them to go into various types of apartments that were available in the city, some of which had been pretty well abated of lead. Pretty much the lead had been cleared out. And then another set of the apartments where there was sort of a medium level of lead abatement. And then another level where there'd been virtually no lead abatement at all. And the purpose of enticing people to move into these was ostensibly to study the effect of lead on the brains of developing children. As if we don't already know the answer to the question, what does lead do to the brains of developing children? So in a sense, this is Tuskegee, you see, updated for modern times. We're going to experiment on people in the name of science. Objective science, and they justified this all kinds of ways, right? They said, well, a lot of these people were already exposed to lead, so at least the ones who go into the more abated facilities will probably see some improvement, you know. So they take these folks and they put them in 3 different levels of lead-abated housing. They bribe them to go in by giving them $50 gift certificates, or t-shirts, or a week's worth of groceries, or whatever it was, right? So desperate people will do desperate things. They take their families into these places. What do you know? The kids that were in the heavily lead-abated areas did pretty well. Their blood levels of lead actually declined, because they might have gone from a place that was worse to a place that was better. Fabulous, right? But the ones who went into the heavily lead-infested, non-abated places saw significant spikes in their lead levels in their blood, up to 3-4 times what is considered a safe average, right? And so their lives have been impaired, all for the sake of data gathering. Now, we already know, without having to do that study, what the effects of lead are. Obviously, the only humane solution would have been to knock down all the lead-infested housing, build non-lead-infested housing at whatever cost it took in order for people to be able to live lives that were not lead impaired. But you see, we couldn't do that. Why? Because it's too expensive. Where have you heard this before and recently? It's just not cost effective. We just can't give non-lead infested housing to people. We just can't do it. We can give huge incentives to sports teams to build stadiums. We can give huge incentives to corporations to move their plant to the community, even though when they promise all the jobs that they're going to create, they invariably never do. Or they create them at a level that comes out to like $250,000 in expenses lost and taxes lost for every job you create that pays 60 or 70 at the best, right? So really you end up with a net outflow. Governments do that all the time. State governments do that. Local governments do that. Incentives for corporations, for rich people, for millionaires. You got a team in St. Louis moving back to LA, right? The Rams are going back to LA. Why? Because St. Louis can't give them the kinds of incentives that they need to remain competitive.